Good morning, sociologists. Welcome to class today. So today is going to be a two-part series. We're going to talk about social problems in sociology in terms of doing research. So sometimes we forget that sociology is a science, it's a social science, and in that we have to abide by all of the same rules. So let's talk about some of the main terminology in sociology and what we're going to learn today. So our think, pair, share for today, or our discussion questions, we have quite a few. 1 through 9. What does it mean to say we're taking a value-free approach to sociology? Try to list and describe the steps in the research model. It's really important to know at least vaguely the steps in the research model and understand what people mean when they're saying that, because there's a very big difference between actual research and what people call research in everyday language. They mean Googling, essentially, right? What does it mean to say we start and end with theory? What is a variable, an independent variable, and a dependent variable? And I'm going to give you a little trick for remembering the difference between them. What's the difference between validity and reliability? What's a spurious correlation? What are social policies, and what are they used for? And what's the difference between conservative policies and liberal policies? And what's the difference between social issues and economic issues? So you might already be a little bit stressed or have a little anxiety surrounding what we're going to talk about today. Just remember that research and statistics is just another set of terminology that you need to learn. And it doesn't matter what field you go into, you need to know this terminology, you need to understand it, because it's going to help you in your everyday life. It helps you differentiate real information from false information. It helps you to see when people are being disingenuous when they're trying to tell you something, especially in the media, because they'll use some of these kind of terms, but they won't use them appropriately, or they'll try to misconstrue you. And if you know what you're looking at, these things are obvious. And it's just like anything else. If you think about sports terminology or music or media, you learn terms and new, basically terminology within language, right? Or within a different field, like within medicine, we learn new terminology. It's not anything different. And so this is meant to be an introduction, right, to that. And we're doing our first practices at research and applying research here in this class. So this is a great way to start. Don't get nervous. I'm here to walk you through it. Okay, so the first thing that we need to talk about is Max Weber. And the reason why we talk about him in Intro to Soc, and we're talking about him here, is because he brought us something that was very foundational. Weber said we need to take a value-free approach to science, including the social sciences. And what he meant was that we need to be as objective as possible. Now, both in the social and what other people might call the hard sciences, people will often not take an objective approach. They have an agenda. They have a medicine that they want to get out there. They have a political view that they want to get out there. And they start with that, and then they try to make the, they try to implement the research steps, and they try to use objective evidence to support the argument that they've already decided is correct. When you're a scientist, especially a social scientist, the thing that you have to start with is you don't get to decide. You can have a question, and you can have a hypothesis that's a claim of assertion or fact that you are going to test, but you don't get to say, this is what's right, and I'm going to make the evidence fit it. You need to say, this is the question that I have. let me be open-minded to the evidence, and use the steps in the process to help me be objective, to not include my bias. Now, do you have bias? Yes. Do I have bias? Yes. We can't make it through the world without bias. If you don't have bias, you wouldn't know when to cross the street, when it's safe or not. So we all have bias. It helps us navigate our worlds. But as a scientist, you're supposed to put that aside. So oftentimes we perceive science as with an agenda, but most scientists, almost everybody within the scientific field, holds this value at the core of their ethics. And they truly do believe they're supposed to be objective, they're supposed to be unbiased. Otherwise, they believe that they're not doing science. So what's the scientific method? So it's basically just a set of steps in a process. It's helped to maintain that objectivity. So it allows us to all kind of use the same process, whether you're doing medical science, sociology, psychology, physics, it doesn't matter. We're all using the same steps. Now, every once in a while, you'll see the steps with slightly different names, or they might be reordered a little bit, but they're all essentially the same steps. So what's the steps? Define the problem. That means you need to ask a research question, review the literature, and that means peer-reviewed, published academic scientific articles, not Google, not Twitter, not social media. It has to be peer-reviewed academic articles. So what does it mean to be peer-reviewed? It means that other people within your field have read your article and critiqued it and pointed out all of your mistakes before you were allowed to get published. So oftentimes, and trust me, they're not nice about it. They will point out the mistakes that you made, where you went wrong, and then they will send it back to the drafting board, meaning to you, to fix any mistakes you may or may not have made. So once you pass that review of literature, or lit review, you are going to select a design or formulate a hypothesis. So sometimes you will see people will create their hypothesis first, and sometimes they will do a design first. Those two can be interchangeable, especially depending on how much experience you have doing research. So to select a design means that you are looking at the types or methods of data collection, and you are choosing what you think is most appropriate to either test your hypothesis or answer your question or help expand upon your question. And what you need to know to be able to do this step in the process is you need to have like a running understanding of all of your different options, and then be able to choose which ones you think are most appropriate to test your hypothesis, or to expand upon the research question that you're asking to help answer that research question. This is a step that new researchers find very challenging, and this is actually what you're going to be doing for your assignment this week, which is in the next part of this lecture, we're going to go through all of the methods, and you're going to choose which one you think would be good at answering your social problem. Formulate a hypothesis. So a hypothesis is simply a testable statement or a claim of fact. And so what you're doing is you're making an assertion that will connect variables that can be testable and that you can use to test against. So you're basically writing that down and following those rules. You carry out your research, which means you actually go out into the field and collect data. If you're a social scientist, that might be surveys or interviews. That might mean that you go into a lab, that, if you're in the medical field, you might be drawing blood, that kind of thing. That's carrying out research. You interpret your results. So once you have your data, you need to interpret your results. You interpret results, again, trying to be unbiased by using one of the main or pre-chosen theoretical or theory. So that you can kind of overlay that theory over your data and analyze your data with that theory. That's what we mean when we say we start with theory and end with theory, because when we're thinking about our research question, we're thinking in terms of the theories of the field, and our research question usually emerges from an understanding of theory. And then when we interpret our results, we are overlaying theory as a method to not use our own preconceived notions to analyze the data that we found. Then we report those findings. That may be in the form of a research paper that then gets reviewed. It gets added to the body of literature, or it could mean you can publish within sort of the mainstream, like if you were going for like public policy, government reports, that kind of thing. You may give presentations, that type of information. That's what we mean by reporting our findings, and then you repeat the process over again. Usually you've now honed your research problem and you can start again. How do theory and research work together? So we've kind of started from this assumption. We kind of talked about it a little bit, right? So C. Wright Mills argued, who's our theme of this whole class, right? He argued that without theory, you basically have nothing. That science becomes abstract. It becomes essentially too easy to manipulate if you ignore the theories of the times. And it just becomes a collection of facts. He said that you need to start with theory to ask the questions, because those act as the foundation for your whole process of your question and how you create a hypothesis. And then they also act as the foundation for which you're going to analyze your research or analyze the data that you collected. So when we say a sociologist starts with theory and ends with theory, you have to have a good running understanding of the theories in the field in order to create a well thought out question, research question, and then also to do a good job and a value-free analysis of the data you've collected. So let's just kind of show how that would work. So knowledge and understanding of theory creates your question, review your literature, research design, create your research design, your hypothesis, collect your data, and then analyze using theories, and then you report. So you can see it's circular in its understanding. So what's a hypothesis and what are variables? So I've mentioned this a couple times, right? So a hypothesis is a testable claim of fact that's connecting two or more variables. Those variables are going to be independent variables or dependent variables. So let me give you an example here. I used a common marker for a theory, so H of 1. So H of 1, 2, 3, 4, or H of A, B, C, D is the way that you would denote that that is a directional or additional hypothesis. So this one is, as noise levels increase, stress increases. So I have two variables here. I'm connecting two variables and I'm making an assertion of a claim of fact, and it's directional. They're both increasing. So noise is one variable and stress is another variable. Both of them are increasing. And theoretically, I can test both noise levels and stress levels. That is its own process in and of itself, creating the ability to test something that is more abstract. In some sciences, they say, oh, you can't do that. In sociology, we know very clearly you can measure things like happiness things like what we call familialism, how much effort you have to put into your family that's expected, religiosity, which is your level of religion, right? So we go through an additional step or process to make something abstract like that very concrete so that we can measure it. So we would do the same for stress. If this was a null hypothesis or a non-directional hypothesis, same thing, null hypothesis and non-directional hypothesis, it would be either there is no correlation between noise and stress, or there is a correlation between noise and stress. Both of those are non-directional, and those would be my null hypothesis. So often a null hypothesis, an H of 0, is in the negative. Sometimes people will say the opposite of what you think it's going to be, because that's the one you're actually testing against. And then you give the variations of all the other 4 variables. So you would say as noise levels increase, stress levels increase. As noise levels decrease, stress levels decrease. As noise levels increase, stress level decreases. You get the point, right? So what's a variable? Any measurable trait or characteristic that can change. IQ, noise, what we were saying before, religiosity, familialism, age, all of these are traits that are variable, so that makes them variables, right? They can change, they can go up or down or change in some way. Health. So what's the difference between an independent variable and a dependent variable? An independent variable causes or influences another variable, and a dependent variable is the one that's influenced by the previous variable. So I told you I was going to give you a trick to remembering these. They're in general pretty straightforward. The problem that arises is a year later or even a week later when you're taking a quiz or an exam, you've stepped away from the definition and now you've forgotten which one is which, right? So an independent variable and a dependent variable, the independent variable causes the change in the dependent variable, and the dependent variable is changed by the independent variable. Now, if you relate that to yourself personally, you will be able to keep them straight. So what I do is I say, in my life, I'm the independent variable and my husband's the dependent variable. So you got to pick somebody, and you have to actually do this in order to remember them. So you have to play along with me, even though you're online, right? So I'm the independent variable, my husband's the dependent variable. If I get upset, then I cause him to get upset. But if he gets upset, I don't care. Do you get how that works, right? So I'm the independent variable because I cause his emotions to change, but he's the dependent variable because he cannot cause my emotions to change. So I told him years ago that I tell this little story, and he says that, why do you lie to your students? Because it's the other way around. But it doesn't matter who you pick or how you turn it. Somebody said they did it with their cat and they feel like it works great because their cat's the independent variable, right? So just do that. Have somebody you can connect it to, and I promise you, you will never forget which one is which after that. Okay, so hopefully 3rd time's the charm. I'm having a difficult time talking here because I'm stuffed up. But we're going to talk about some terminology that you need to know in order to create research designs. And it's terminology that's used differently than you would understand it in everyday public use or common everyday language. Population, target population, and sample. So a population, when you're talking about populations in science, you're talking about the characteristics of the people who you are potentially generalizing to or identifying. You're not talking about a specific number. So in everyday language, we would say the population of LA County is 10 million. If you're talking about it in terms of science, you would identify characteristics. The population of the population of LA County is from 0 to 99 years old. They are of a variety of racial groups, and then you list the different racial groups. They are male, female, intersexed. They are of a variety of sexual orientations. You get the point, right? You're talking about these people's different characteristics. That's a population when you're talking about it in science, when you're going to be using it for the purposes of research. The target population is the characteristics of the group of people that you want to target. So say, now I know I'm going to target people in LA County, but I'm looking at people who enjoy drinking Coors Light, right? But I really only want to look at people who drink Coors Light, who are male, who are adults between the ages of 30 and 50, who live in LA County, and who drink beer on a regular basis, right? So that's a target population. And you're identifying the characteristics. Now, say for example, I'm actually going to do the research and I'm creating my research design. I can't actually survey or interview or test everybody who is in that target population. I need a smaller sample than the actual population that can hopefully represent the entire target population that I can generalize to. So I would, either through random or non-random sampling, I would start to include individuals from among that target population for the purposes of my research. It's going to be a smaller sample set. And the way that I choose to include them, we're not going to go through all of those methods today, will hopefully allow me to generalize to those particular people. So I might pick 1 out of every 7th adult male who drinks Coors Light, and choose those people randomly. And then once that's complete, there's actually a number, basically a statistical formula that you can use that allows you to know how many people you need to interview in order to be able to generalize to that particular group. That's my sample population. Those are the people that not only fall within the target population parameters, but that I can realistically talk to, interview, survey, test in order to be able to generalize to the entire population, target population that I want to talk about. The reason why we do that, or the reason why we would choose particular methods like random sampling, is because of what we call validity and reliability. So when we very clearly identify the characteristics of our target population and then follow the rules for sampling, for collecting and analyzing data from our sample population, we can reliably, and what we would say with validity, generalize to that larger population. So what really is validity and reliability? Well, validity means that you are actually researching what you intend on researching. So we talked about in the hypothesis that, we were measuring noise levels and stress, right? And stress levels. So noise levels, you can use a noise altimeter and it will give you the actual numbers of noise levels. And so you can follow that increase or decrease and then compare it to stress levels. Now, somebody might say, well, you can't measure stress. How would you measure stress? You do measure stress by creating what we call in sociology or in social sciences a conceptualization. And when you conceptualize a fact or an abstract concept, you make it concrete. You say, this is exactly what it is, and this is how I'm going to measure it. So a good example of that would be religiosity. So religiosity is a term that's used for this conceptualized version of how religious someone is. So somebody has spent time looking at people who are religious, analyzing how they express their religion, both what they say, how they act, how much they participate in religious events and organizations, and they take all of that and they create essentially a study guide, a map, a definition. A conceptualization is a concrete definition of an abstract concept, and it allows you to then measure that abstract concept. When you do that, you're able to actually measure what you intend on measuring it, because you have something concrete in front of you, and then you can set a set of rules in order to measure that. That creates validity. You could also then hand that definition, conceptualization, over to someone else, and then they can use that same conceptualization definition to reliably measure that same concept. So you are both valid and reliable. You have validity because you're measuring the same thing. You know what you're measuring, and you're measuring it. You are measuring what you actually intend on measuring. And we have an example here of not reliable, not valid, right? Because they want to measure this part, but they're measuring over here. So they're reliable, but they're not valid. They're reliably, consistently measuring something different, and they're doing it over and over again, but they're not measuring what they want to measure. This is both low validity and low reliability, so they're all over the place. This one's not reliable or valid. And then this one is both reliable and valid. So it's a nice visual aid for you, right? So you're measuring what you intend on measuring, and you're doing it consistently over and over again. That is validity and reliability. So remember, we just covered 5 terminologies that are very important to the social sciences: validity, reliability, population, target population, sample. This is what it means to know how to do statistics and know how to do research. You understand this terminology, you have a good working knowledge of it, so you can just simply use it to apply to research. And that's what it means to be able to understand and do research. So let's talk a little bit about spurious correlations and truth in statistics. So let's start with spurious correlations, which I'm covering slightly over here. So spurious correlations are things that are connected or look like they're correlated, like as noise levels increase, stress increases. You might have data that supports this kind of evidence, that you have a connection between the two. But the actual connection has to do with the third variable that's out there that you're not aware of. So the one we have here is U.S. spending on science, space, and technology, and suicides by hanging, strangulation, and suffocation. So you can see here that the data from 1999 to I think it's like 2010, 2009, shows a very strong correlation, meaning as one increases, the other one increases. You see the data points moving upward here. And then as the other decreases, the other one decreases. So this has a very strong correlation, but that doesn't mean that one is causing the other. And that's often when people don't understand science or how research works, they can conflate correlation with causation. And that's why, like, for example, in when we talk about climate change, and you'll have somebody in the media say, well, do humans cause climate change? A scientist will never tell you that A causes B, because to say the word cause means 100%. That can never happen. A scientist won't even say that a stint, like that, if you have a stint that will, prevent you 100% from having a heart attack, right? Because that's a causation, and it can have a success rate of 99.999, but there's always a possibility for failure due to some unknown variable. And scientists are very aware of that, and they take that very seriously. So they will not ever tell you cause. They will not make the claim of causation in that regard. But a spurious correlation is one that is completely, really, usually unrelated, but it looks like it's very related. The most famous example that you're always going to get from teachers is the correlation between, as ice cream sales increase, crime increases. Now, does eating ice cream cause crime to increase? No, absolutely not. The variable that's in between those two is weather. As it gets nice and warm and sunny, people go out, they enjoy the day, they are more likely to buy ice cream. But criminals, they also go out, enjoy the day, commit crime. When it's cold and snowing and uncomfortable and raining outside, everybody stays home, including those people who commit crime, right? So it's a spurious correlation to say that crime and ice cream sales are, or eating ice cream is correlated. So let's talk about that's one of the ways, actually, that sometimes people can mislead you with statistics, because they can find a spurious correlation, and if you don't understand how those two things can work, they can manipulate the way that they present the data or the information to make it look like causation. Another one is what I was just talking about, is where you ask a pointed question that the scientist has to say no to, because you might understand how science works, and that a scientist will never tell you A causes B, that it might be correlated, highly correlated at over 99%, but it does not mean causation. Another one is how the terms are defined. And so we have the same piece of data here, if you want to look at it. And you can spin statistics this way if you understand how statistics work. And you also can kind of tell when people are faking a statistic if you understand how statistics work in this way. So here's data on unemployment rates by year. So it's the same data. So the data is from 1980 to 2015. That's a nice, decent spread. And you could see that unemployment has gone down and then increased and then gone down again and then increased. So it kind of has this up and down effect where you have peaks and then you have declines, significant declines. But say that I want to say that there's been really no change in the unemployment rate. What I can do is I can switch this data and I can make the unemployment rate numbers, if you look here, 1 to 10 through 1 to 100. So unemployment rate really only varies between 1 and 10% at any given time. So we want to look specifically at that. If we increase the load, we're never going to have 100% unemployment. We can make the same peaks and crevices look almost flat over the same years by simply adding in additional rates where we know it would never go. The other way that we can do that is, say, for example, I want to scare people into believing that the unemployment rates have soared. So I can pick one of these increases, and I could just simply go from, I would here go from 2007, which is actually what they did, to 2010, and I can show a dramatic increase in unemployment. This is the way that you can shape social policies. It's not, our cultural values are often surrounded by what we hear and we're told is a social problem. And so within common culture, the media, policies, politics, these strategies can be used to, as strategies to affect how people in society operate. It's quite easy to sway groups of people. It really is not that hard. And one of the ways that we can do that with offering a sense of validity, right, is to use statistical data. Now, if you're never really going to learn stats in school, if you were afraid of it, if you ran away from it, if you never got a college education and you don't learn these things, you are the most easily manipulated in regards to this because you don't know what you're looking at. And these numbers and terms, they can be scary, right? So this is how we shape information, and we manipulate the truth with statistics. Okay, so what you might be thinking is, okay, that's what scientists do. Think back to what we were talking about in terms of reviewing literature. And I said that in order to be published, you have to be peer reviewed. So don't forget that as a scientist, as a peer-reviewed, published scientist, you can't get away with those things because it's your other cohort, your colleagues, people who understand the data, who understand statistics and understand the information that you're doing, your particular field, who are reviewing your research. And so if you try to do stuff like that, they will call you out on it. Now, people often think, okay, well, it's conservatives or liberals or somebody else who does this, right? Let's just first talk about what policies and politics are in terms of, in general, what is a conservative policy and what's a liberal policy and what's a radical policy. So to say that somebody's conservative, either in politics or in their norms or in their everyday life, remember, C. Wright Mills says the personal is political. So the political is personal. To be conservative means to want to limit the scope of social change. You want to prevent movement forward. If you can inhibit change, that's a conservative policy. If the policy or the person seeks to limit change in any way, shape, or form, that would make it a conservative policy. It's not about in what we would think of in particular being left or right, even though often people on the left or the right fall within that. But all of us tend to be on the political spectrum in between, and we have a range of political attitudes. Some of those political attitudes are conservative, and because we want to limit the scope of change, we don't want things to change, or they could be liberal in that we want things to change, whether it's in one direction or the other. So to say you are liberal or a policy is liberal or a viewpoint is liberal, it means that you're seeking change within society. You want things to be different than they actually are. So in general, conservative policies tend to focus on the micro, on individual blame, and liberal policies focus on the macro, on problems within the social organizations, the social structure of society. So to say something is systemically a problem, it's a problem within the systems, the policies, the organizations. To focus on that, to see that, that is inherently liberal. Radical means whether you are conservative or liberal, because you can be a conservative radical or a liberal radical. It simply means that you want the policies or the change to go beyond simple reform. You want a complete disruption of the particular norms, values, mores, laws of the current time. So if you want to dismantle the government, if you want to break the government down, you are a radical, whatever your values behind that are, whatever you look like, whatever flag you're carrying. If you want to break the system down, essentially, to create anarchy, that is a radical policy. If you want to change things in a massive way, that makes you radical. So what's the difference between social issues and economic issues? So social issues are any kind of debate or policy involving moral judgments or how people should live. Economic issues involve your material resources or how you access the economy or how you access wealth. Those are economic issues. Generally, people on both ends of the spectrum can have they have interest in social issues and economic issues. So if you don't believe that marijuana should be legal because it's immoral, that makes it a social issue for you. If you do believe that marijuana should be legal because it will increase the tax base for your community, that's an economic issue for you. Okay, so that's done for the day. I know that was a long one. I hope you were able to make it through. Here is our discussion writing workshop, and good luck with the discussion shop. I think you will do really well, and it's not as scary and as hard as you think it would be. Have a great day, everyone.